This is Unit 1, U.S. History Regents Review, Part 3. We just finished in the last video talking about the Declaration of Independence, one of the most significant documents in all of world history that people take seriously. Its number one goal was to declare independence from Great Britain. This is the moment that the United States is officially at war with Britain to become its own country. That's the number one reason that this is important. But the number two and equally important effect of this document is that it describes human beings as all having natural rights that come from God. They cannot be taken away by anyone. They are part of what it means to be human. And we are going to continually reflect on this document throughout the rest of US history, including today. We discuss this document. People take it seriously. It is inspirational. It is a revolution in and of itself. I also want to note that they are referencing ideas from John Locke about natural rights and about the social contract theory, that because Great Britain has started to abuse its power and not protect the rights of the people it governs, that means the people do have the right to overthrow that government and institute a brand new one. So this officially kicks off the war. We are at war. We're fighting to become an independent country. This is called the Revolutionary War or the American Revolution. You'll see either one. And how is it being fought? The Continental Army is being led by George Washington. That's the official army that people could sign up for. But also local townsmen could join militias and create their own little local groups. No formal uniforms or anything, but people would bring their own guns and weapons from home to defend their towns and fight against the British. Now, there's not a ton that's going to be asked of you on the exam about the war, but the main things to understand are that it really looked like the Americans were not going to win. They were outnumbered, outmanned, outplanned. They were not as experienced as the British. The British had the most powerful army and navy in the entire world. They had a gigantic empire. And it was kind of bold for these Americans, this ragtag army, to try to stand up to the British. But, Britain had a lot of other wars going on. Its efforts were divided. They did not take this threat very seriously. So they did not put all of their resources into it and all of their soldiers. They were a bit overconfident. And the colonists realized that they had to avoid straight out fighting against the British because they would lose. So they adopt other tactics like guerrilla warfare. They had a home front advantage. They knew the land, they had the resources, while Britain had to get their supplies from across the ocean. And we had a spy network, some really interesting stuff. And eventually the French help us because the French hate the British, want to do anything to screw them over. So the goal here is really to make the war too costly for the British to justify. So they drag it out, it becomes difficult, annoying, and eventually the British do surrender to this army. Yay, we won. So now, oh my goodness, we're our own independent country. What the heck are we going to do? Well, first thing, we need to have some sort of government. So the Continental Congress gets together and they create the Articles of Confederation. The government under these articles signs the peace treaty with Great Britain. They're setting up our brand new country. So this is created as a government that really leaves most of the power to the states. Because keep in mind, these states had all developed their own identity, their own forms of government. They're used to running themselves. And frankly, they're afraid of any kind of centralized power. They just got rid of a monarchy, a powerful, abusive king, and they don't want another king. They don't want another strong central government. So the articles are created to leave most of the power to individual states and create a really weak central government. So while the states kind of like this, it also creates problems because there's some chaos when there's no centralized government. Every single state had different currency, different weights and measures. They got into arguments with one another. They had trouble setting up an economy and trade with other countries, or foreign policy with other countries. They didn't really have a military. They didn't have the power to tax the states. So there are just some issues going on. Their one success, which you can see in this picture over here, is they created the Northwest Ordinance, which created a plan for how to set up new territories, new states, and admit them to the Union. But all these issues, they can't really change the articles. It takes all 13 colonies to agree on something if they're going to amend the articles, and 9 out of 13 of them had to agree to any laws, and it's hard to get them all to agree. And then there's a rebellion on the frontier called Shays' Rebellion, and it really shows everyone that there is not much control the federal government has to stop any issues. So everyone knows it's an issue. They get together at the Constitutional Convention, and their original goal is to revise the Articles of Confederation, and instead they threw them out and wrote a new constitution. They basically had a government overthrow in this summer, and I mean, this is radical. This is crazy. They sat down and they wrote their own form of government. So, as they're creating this government, they're setting it up to have three branches and deciding what to do with the states and all these things. Some of the two big arguments that came up that are often on the Regents are arguments about representation. This is the first one. Small states wanted there to be equal representation by each state in the federal government. So, just like you can see over here. So, little states like New Jersey said, let's all have equality. However, the big states hear this and they freak out and they're like, no way. Virginia, for example, is highly populated. That would not be fair for New Jersey and Virginia to have the same amount of say in the federal government. So Virginia wants this to be based on population. That freaks out the small states. They threaten to leave. And suddenly someone says, hey, I have a plan. And they come up with the Great Compromise. It's a really great compromise. They create a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two house, to make both the big and small states happy. What it does is it creates a Senate, which has two senators, equal representation for each state, while the House of Representatives is based on population. So the bigger states, the more highly populated states, have more representatives, while the really small states just have one. And then these two houses have to work together to pass legislation. So this plan makes people happy. But then the other issue that comes up is, hey, if the house is going to be based on population, do slaves count as part of that population? So obviously, the slave holding states want the slaves to count as people, while the northern states say, no, that's hypocritical. They can't be both your property and also citizens of your state or count towards your population. So eventually they come up with this compromise. It's called the 3/5 compromise. Don't ask me where they got this number. And they said 3 out of every 5 slaves are going to count towards your population. This is not saying that slaves are worth 3/5 of a person. It's not supposed to be a mathematical calculation of their value. It just means 3 out of every 5 of slaves will count towards the population when we are figuring out representation. As this Constitution is being wrapped up, they've written it and they're sending it out to the states to approve. There is a big debate between two groups: the Federalists, who support it, here there, versus the Anti-Federalists, who are opposed to it. The Federalists argued in favor of the new Constitution because they liked that it created a strong federal government. They said only a strong federal government can protect people's rights and protect the country physically and create a strong economy. They published these papers called the Federalist Papers to convince the public to support it. The Anti-Federalists are opposed to it because they're afraid of a strong central government and think it needs a Bill of Rights added to it.